Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. I mean, that's why, for me as a researcher and somebody who's an advocate, and I train police departments. I've trained and still train the military. Deception is really important to understand, and for me, I think what really became personal about this research for me is everybody was always asking me the question, why? Why did your dad do what he did? Was he abused? That's the most common question people ask me. Was he abused when he was a kid? My answer is, I don't know and I don't care. 90% of the time, or 80% of the time, if we want to be more accurate, 80% of the time, people who've been abused will never go on to abuse, whether they're male or female. Victims of sexual abuse do not go on to abuse. Why? Because they know what it feels like. They actually become the opposite. They become protectors of children. So the why question, what made my dad the way he was, that's an endless abyss. I could get lost in that forever and still never have a good answer. I don't know why he did what he did, except that he wanted to. My question is, how did he do it? What are the techniques? Because you're right. I mean, abusers can be anybody, and victims can be anybody. We talk about vulnerable children and, the kids without parents and without loving homes. Yes and no. I mean, my dad.
There is no definition.
No. I mean, my dad didn't prey on people who had broken homes. He was quite the opposite. He preyed on people who had good, loving parents, who had stable homes. So, my thing is understanding how they do what they do, particularly abuse in plain sight, because that gives us something tangible that if we know they're doing it, if we understand something about their techniques and how they see us, how they view us as they're doing it, it's akin to taking somebody who's in the audience at a magician show, and instead of having them in the audience, you actually pull them up on stage, spin them around, and have them face the audience. They're now up on stage with a different perspective, and they're looking at the audience through the lens of, through the eyes of the magician who's up on the stage. So my question is, how do abusers see us? If somebody's an abuser and you come into their space or you come into their room, what are they thinking about you? What are their techniques to test you and to know whether you're a vulnerable person or not, whether you're gullible? What are their specific techniques? And you talked about language, and language is so important. Mm-hmm. You talked about, are they getting too much information from my kid? Well, that's what abusers do. It's information mining. They're constantly mining information, but it doesn't look and feel like mining information. They have techniques that are so subtle, and it's something as simple as, tell me about yourself. That's a common, probably the most common first greeting that abusers will say to somebody. Tell me about yourself. Well, inevitably, what's the first thing that we start talking about? Our kids, right? And well, I'm married. I have 3 kids. And then they intentionally give awkward silence. They don't reciprocate, and that's when you're being manipulated. They don't reciprocate information, and you get so lost in talking about yourself that you keep revealing more and more information. And they give these little periods of 3, 4, 5 second awkward silence. And as human beings, we're just wired to fill in that space. We hate silence.
But that's why we need to train people differently, because I want to flip a little bit of what you said around, because I don't want any victim who's listening to think in any way they were at fault because they answered the questions. Because
not at all.
Right. Yeah. It's a very human, compassionate thing to do. And we are trained. to answer questions, to be polite, especially to our elders, especially to people who come in our home or our neighbors, right? So we need to change that, not give out information. And if somebody does ask for information, tell that trusted adult. But for a predator, what they do is they do look for someone who might be alone. They look for certain kinds of people, but why do they do it? Let's put the why question on them. It's really about power and control over another human being. If you remember in English class, whether it's high school or college, there's the various powers, the struggle, what makes a book interesting. Well, the most interesting power, it's not, there's man against nature, there's man against animals, right? But there's man against man, right? And so that is the most powerful dynamic. So when we have man against man, we're looking at this predator having this control, power and control over another human being, and they're getting this thrill. It's not about the sexual act in sex the way, we know it in a loving relationship.
Right. Yeah.
It's about, putting your hands or your penis or whatever it is inside someone and having such control over that person, that power, that's the rush. It's not about the sexual act.
Yes.
And you have to understand those dynamics and make sure that victims know that they were powerless. There was nothing they could have done different to stop it. There was nothing they did to attract it. It's a game that's within the predator's head that causes them to, seek you out and get you to trust them and do all those things that are inappropriate in a way that you don't know. And it's about power and control. Nothing they did should the victim bear the blame of. It is solely on the predator, always, in every case.
That is exactly right. And, just talking to my dad too, and kind of getting inside his head a little bit, which is a very dark, scary place. But he talks about how easy it is to pick out both people who are potential victims and matching them to the right vulnerable parents who are a little bit more gullible, who would be quick to defend him if there were any accusations. And he said, and I think this is one of the few times that he was incredibly truthful with me, but he said, I can walk into any room and within 30 seconds, I can pick out all the vulnerable people who are potential targets. From there, it's just the process of I test them. And then once I test them, I begin grooming them. This happens quick, and it's not that any of these victims have targets painted on them, because I think a lot of them feel that way. Mary DeMuth wrote a book, Not Marked, because she felt for years that she had this big target on her because she was abused so many times by so many different people. And the reality is you don't have a target on you. There is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that makes you necessarily more vulnerable than other people. It's just that abusers settle in on people who they quickly know how to manipulate, and they do it without you knowing what they're doing to them. I mean, that's part of the technique. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We need much better training to be able to help people identify, especially parents. Parents need to bear a lot more responsibility than the child ever should for being able to defend themselves, because kids shouldn't be expected to do it. They're kids.
But it's hard though as a parent. I don't want any parent to watch this and say, oh, now they're blaming me. Parents get blamed for everything.
Yeah.
It's just when you recognize it, again, follow your gut. As we teach our children to follow their gut, parents have to follow their gut. Ask the questions. Don't be shy. When it comes to your child, you have an absolute right to know, that constitutionally protected right to know. And if the questions are not answered to your satisfaction, change schools, change churches, change gyms. There will always be a better fit where you're comfortable and your child is happy. Look for, the demeanor of your child is so important. They will tell you subliminally, I have a stomach ache. I don't want to, I have a stomach ache before I go to catechism. I have a stomach ache before school. But then they don't have a stomach ache when they go to play ball or to their neighbors. The stomach ache is not a stomach ache. It's a tell to you something's going on there, and they don't know how to tell you. They might not even know it's wrong. They just feel it's wrong. We just need to partner together to be the voice and to be those watchful eyes. It's really hard to blame anybody but the predator. I just think it's one of those things where education is key. And also, I'm still contacted almost daily by victims saying, thank you for being my voice, and I need help with this or that, or why did this happen to me? And I say, let's not look at why this happened to you. You don't bear any fault. It's solely on the predator.
Right.
And I tell them, heal in your own time. You need a trained therapist. You need to heal in your own time. I'm not a therapist, but I want you to know it's not your fault. And they tend to believe me over someone else because I'm that judge. And I try to use that robe that I have and the position I have for good, not evil. And to tell people they matter. They did nothing wrong. The conversation I had recently with a woman who's a female and was assaulted by her female coach. And she talked to me about it. She didn't want to report it, and I'm not sure she's reported it yet, but she said, why did she pick out me? And I said, I promise you, she didn't just pick out you. I know you feel that way, but she picked out everybody who was vulnerable, who she wanted. And I promise you, you're not the only one. So she did research because she didn't believe that. She didn't want to believe because she was so sad about what happened to herself. She didn't want to believe it happened to anybody else she knew. So she started contacting people and did some research and, in fact, found out, yes, there are dozens of them. And she said, I can't believe you were right. And I said, well, I deal with this every day. I've been, a lawyer for 35 years. I've dealt with thousands of cases. And now as a judge, I see it. I hear it. And as much as people want to believe, well, I'm the only one. And it's part of grooming to say, well, you're the only one. And you and I and all of that. You're not the only one. Report it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay. We don't want you to be harmed in the process. But please, always, if this has happened to you, deal with a trained therapist. They are your secret keeper. They will never divulge anything. And it's really important that every human has a secret keeper.
Yes. Well, I want to shift gears just a little bit, and spend the last remaining time. I could talk to you forever, but the last remaining time, I want to talk about something that you had just mentioned, and then I want to shift to Larry's letter that you had decided to read. But I just want to reiterate, I guess, the point that it is never the victim's fault. It is not the parents' fault. The parents weren't negligent who were in the room with Larry Nassar. Larry bore all the responsibility. You're 100% with that. I thought you did an excellent job during the sentencing to look the victims in the eyes and tell them this was not your fault. I think that's so important. Yes, we need better training, but this is not on the parents or the victims. Larry was trust me, he was using highly sophisticated techniques to do what he did and get away with it with so many victims, so many times for so many years. That was not by accident that he got away with this. He knew what he was doing. He was very skilled. And I want to shift now to the letter, the infamous letter, which I wish was getting more attention publicly. Because there were several times where people in the courtroom audibly gasped. And in fact, I want to play this short video. It's like 5 minutes. I want to show this in case people in our audience haven't seen this or heard you read the letter. I want to show that just for context. So then I want to talk about how important that was for you to decide to read that. So
on the federal case and 90% on the state cases and civil suits. She gave me 60 years instead of 5 to 20 years, in parentheses, 3 consecutive 20-year sentences. I pleaded guilty to possession of porn from 9/2004 to 12/2004. 4 months. The prosecutor even admitted that I never belonged to any porn sites, any chat rooms, was not on the dark web, and also they could not prove I viewed it. It was all deleted, of course. I shared my electronics, and I could not prove that. So for 4 months of porn possession from 2004, I was sentenced to 60 years. Not proper, appropriate, fair. Going down a few lines. What I did in the state cases was medical, not sexual. But because of the porn, I lost all support, thus another reason for the state guilty plea. Let me move down further. So I tried to avoid a trial to save the stress to this community, my family, the victims. Yet look what is happening. It is wrong. Let me move down further. I was a good doctor because my treatments worked, and those patients that are now speaking out were the same ones that praised and came back over and over and referred family and friends to see me. The media convinced them that everything I did was wrong and bad. They feel I broke their trust. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. It is just a complete nightmare. The stories that are being fabricated to sensationalize this. Then the AG would only accept my plea if I said what I did was not medical and was for my own pleasure. They forced me to say that, or they were going to trial and not accepting the plea. I wanted to plead no contest, but the AG refused that. I was so manipulated by the AG and now Aquilina, and all I wanted was to minimize stress to everyone, like I wrote earlier. Going down a little bit further. In addition, with the federal case, my medical treatments with the Olympic/national team gymnastics were discussed as part of the plea. The FBI investigated them in 2015 and found nothing substantial because it was medical. Now they are seeking the media attention and financial reward.
Okay, tell me about your decision to read that letter, why you decided to do that.
It's no different than why I always have allowed everyone to speak, not just in this case, but since I've become a judge. It's your time to speak in my courtroom at the time of sentencing. Not just the victims, not just the sister survivors in this case, but also defendant. One of the things he did was he wrote me this letter saying it was too hard for him, saying, he wasn't really at fault here. And I can consider that in sentencing. And those are his words. So I had to look at rehabilitation. I have to do a fair and just sentencing. And when I look at that letter and look at his demeanor in my courtroom, which was not always appropriate, he was laughing, he was drawing pictures, he was doing all sorts of things, not paying attention to the girls. And they would say, "Look at me when you speak." And when you look at what he wrote me, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Okay? He has no respect for women. He only has respect for what he wants. It's his world. And that letter, I wanted the girls to know, I wanted the world who was watching, all the media, everybody to know that I consider this. And most importantly, I wanted the Court of Appeals to know I consider this in sentencing. It's not fair to me to have this letter and then they don't know that I considered it. This was his words. His words were, it's not my fault. It was medical. It's everybody's
and they forced me to say this, that I, forced me into a guilty plea.
And it's really about, when we talk about power and control, he wanted the last word. He wanted to take the power from me, from the prosecutor, from the detective, from the girls. He still wanted control. And that is a person who cannot be rehabilitated. And my sentence spoke to that. And I thought it was really important that everybody knows this is his mindset. He's not changing it. Even in the midst of this, when he's admitted guilt, it's a problem. And I also had an obligation to say, do you want to withdraw your plea? Because you're saying now, it sounds to me like you're recanting. And I think it's in the transcript 3 times. He didn't want to recant his plea, but he also doesn't want to.
He said, I have said my plea exactly.
Yes, and I had to force him again during the plea and then during the sentencing to again say, yes, I did this. Yes, I want to proceed. And again, it's that power and control. And that's not someone who can be rehabilitated. He still thinks he's right. We know he's wrong. And what he did was crime after crime after crime. There was nothing about malpractice. There was no mistake.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell you personally what that letter did for me, because I was literally, I watched it live and I was literally standing up, and I don't get real enthusiastic. I'm not that kind of person, but I literally stood up. I was by myself. I was watching it live. I stood up and I said, yes. I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I watched Larry, and I know what people think because I consult with churches, dozens of them all over the country, from mega churches to churches of 5 people. I know what people think when they see an alleged abuser in front of them, because they're crying, and I thought, if there are any church leaders watching this right now, they're seeing Larry. His head is down, the little soft tears going down his cheek. He looks like he's so broken. When some of the victims would speak, he would just, put his head down, and he looked frail. He looked weak. And what that letter did for me was it showed people that all that is an act, that the tears, what you don't see is he's fiddling, he's cracking jokes with his, with his attorney. This is what they do. My dad. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just, that's a grooming game, and he's trying to play me, tried to play everybody. I wasn't having any of it. He doesn't know that I've done thousands of these cases.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not different and he's not special. No predator is. They are all the same kind of animal, and they don't accept guilt or blame. And so people thought, I was too mean to him. Well, you know what? If they saw his demeanor, if they heard his words, if they were next to him and could hear him laughing with his lawyers when the girls were speaking, and you could feel the angst. You didn't just feel it watching live. Being in the courtroom, multiply that by 100, because you could feel it in the room.
Yeah.
As soon as I said something mean to him, the room went from 1,000 upset back down to 0, and was very calm again, because I could sense what people were feeling.
Yeah.
And that letter, I only read. It gets much worse, I think. I only read the parts that I thought were necessary so that everybody was on the same page and understood what I was doing, what I was considering, and why he should never be free.
Yeah, it was crystal clear, and I appreciated that so much. And for me, I haven't obviously been in the courtroom for thousands of cases like you have. Prior to my dad, I had no background whatsoever or experience that I know of with abusers. So this was all new to me at the time. Now it's, you're right. They're all the same animal. Mm-hmm. But the day of sentencing, the judge had cleared out all the cases before where it was just my dad. He took a recess, and then it was just my dad for the sentencing. And on that recess, my dad is sitting, I mean, right in front of me. They're like, I think he was 1 or 2 rows. There might have been a row in between us, but it was me, my mom, and one of my brothers. And we're sitting in the courtroom. He's shackled, and he leans back. He props his feet up on the desk in front of him, both of his feet. He looks back at us and he smiles. Mm-hmm. And it was the most chilling, cold, like the smirk on his face, like, screw you people.
Right.
And then he gets up, the judge comes in, and my dad gets up and goes to the podium, stands beside his attorney. And all of a sudden, his whole demeanor shifted instantly. And I know you see this every time. Yeah. His whole demeanor shifted, and his shoulders got slumped, and he pulls a letter out of his pocket, all dramatically. And his hand is shaking, and he slowly unfolds it. And this is going to be his statement to the judge. And he said, "Your Honor, you'll have to excuse me. My eyesight is failing. I'm an old, frail man, and it may take me a little bit to be able for my eyes to adjust to read this." And I was like, this is the first time ever I've heard about any eye problem that you've had, and it's that whole knowing how to turn it on and turn it off based on their audience is phenomenal. I mean, they're Hollywood actors.
Yes, but you know what? It's deeper than that. And so since you talk about it, I want you to think about this, is because looking at it from the legal perspective, they all appeal. Nassar appealed. There's still an issue. He thinks I was too mean. They haven't responded. The Court of Appeals is still pending. So there's still things I can't talk about. But
sure,
the thing is, when your dad propped his feet up, when Larry was laughing, the record doesn't speak to that. Now, the record in my courtroom speaks to it because of the letter, because of the girls saying, "Look at me." But still, if I would have said, stop laughing, if I would have stopped every single time, we'd still probably be in court because there was so much that was going on. But the record is silent unless you say, why are you laughing, or why are this or that? I think that the record that we made in the Nassar case, it's very clear. I hope the Court of Appeals sees it's very clear that there was this shenaniganism, I guess I'll call it, that he was doing this control with exactly what you're talking about. Things that the record, and we all leave in a court, the court reporter is really the most important person because she takes down every single word, and that's what goes for the appeal. Okay, my decision's important, but the court reporter preserves every word that's said. But that's the thing, it's about words. Those actions that you're talking about, those are not on the record. Mm-hmm. And so unless somebody says, I want the record to reflect, or, Judge, I want you to know that before you came out here, his feet were on the desk, and he laughed, and whatever he did, unless it's said, it won't be on the record. So for anybody who wants to testify or is in this position, make sure there's a record. If you see someone laughing, just say, "Your Honor, before I speak, I just want you to know that before you came out here, he was laughing," or "I don't like the way he's looking at me right now. Your Honor, could you direct him to not smirk at me?" Because that way the record reflects it. And that way the appellate court gets that, what we see in the general trial division, that demeanor that we consider in sentencing, because it's really important.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think I hope any parent who's listening to this, whose child is a victim, I hope that they hear this and talk to their attorney, and that we can start turning the tables on the abusers, because it is absolutely astounding. I mean, it's incredible. And until you see it with your own eyes, it's so unbelievable. And that's, it's so hard to convince. I mean, most of my work is in the church, but it's so hard to convince church leaders that what you see is not what you get. That as soon as this person walks out of the meeting with you, when they're all crying and sniffling and talking about how remorseful they are, as soon as they walk out, they're laughing at you, literally. And it's so important to have that on record. I'm so thankful that you read that letter. I can't thank you enough personally. I thank you.
Yeah, I just did my job. I also want to say one other thing. I don't know if we're running out of time or not, but
No, you're good.
When children can't come to court, or for very young children, regardless, I always order a copy of the transcripts to be given to whoever their advocate is, their parent, guardian, not to be read because they're too young. Or if a victim can't show up because they're so upset, even as an adult, I order a copy of the transcript be given to them. And the reason for that is so when they're ready, when they get married, when they're really wondering what happened because they don't remember, they can take that transcript and take those words and go through it with their secret keeper, with a trained therapist, so that they know they were heard, they were believed, and that they mattered. And I think that's really important. So if you're judge, because as far as I know, I'm the only judge that does that, but parents should know, people should know they can ask for a copy of that transcript, because eventually the transcript disappears. It goes away like a doctor's file, shredded after 20 years or 10 years. Court reporters too. So when that child grows up, or when that adult is ready to hear again, to read the words of what was said, it might not be in existence. So they should order a copy of the transcript. I do it at county expense. So far, I haven't been yelled at about it, but I'd gladly pay for it myself, just because it's so important that the victim knows they were heard, they were believed, and they matter. And they can then, when they're ready, really absorb with a trained therapist what happened, see the words of control that we've just been talking about, that predator said, and understand they were not at fault, that this is a sick individual who needs to be locked up. And I think that that's really important. So if people don't know that's available, they ought to get it and lock it away. And then it must be gone through with a trained person, because that can be very triggering. And we have to be mindful of triggers. But I think that's really an important key that is missing in the equation of all of this, and the healing of the victim. And the victim needs to go from victim to survivor to thriver. And I think that's one thing that can really help them.
Well, that's the first time that I've heard about that. So I was not aware. Probably a lot of people are not aware. And so in my mind, I've already been wanting to meet with our new district attorney, but this will be one of the things that I talk to about with him, about the possibility of our court system doing that, because I think you're absolutely 100% right. That's so important, because kids remember things differently than what actually was happening, because they're kids. Their minds just don't have the capability and the framework to be able to understand all the layers of manipulation and control and power and all those dynamics. So, man, that is really amazing that you do that.
So while you are meeting with him, because I go around the world and do motivational speaking and educating and doing the things I'm doing now, I've also been trying to advocate this, because I think it is a misstep in our legal system. And there are many, and I'm hoping to help fix those. But if someone was assaulted twice, I usually see 2 charges. If someone was assaulted 4 times, I see 4 charges. When you get into predatory behavior, why, when there are victims like Trinae Gonzer, who was assaulted over 800 times, there should have been 800 charges? Because that really tells victims that they matter. There should be no prosecutor who limits the charges just because they say, well, that's enough. No, it's not enough. You tell the victim they matter by charging exactly what happened. That's our system of justice. And then I don't care if there's 10,000 charges. If it happened, then that's why we have a court of law, innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there is evidence of 10 assaults or 500, let's charge them all, because that should be our system of justice, not one where we can cherry pick the crimes. I think that is a miscarriage of justice. It's inappropriate. If there's been an alleged crime, because it's only alleged, then let's put them all down where the evidence points to the elements being provable in court, and let's get them to court.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. My dad, he had 3 charges that it appeared as though he had 3 charges against him in the newspaper. I pulled his docket sheet. There were 200 charges initially. 197 of them were waived as part of a plea deal.
Right.
And that's the stuff that people need to look into that too. And I tell people, when you look at records, actually pull the docket sheets and look at what charges were just magically waived away as part of these plea deals. Some of these plea deals are disgusting.
Yes, that's true. But here's the thing: is plea deals happen for a lot of reasons. And you may think they're disgusting, but here's the thing: many of the victims, they just can't. They're too frail to come to court.
Yeah.
But that's where the prosecutor, from day one, if there's 800 times, they need to charge 800 times. The plea deal may only plead to 10. Who cares? At least from the outset, from day one, the victim knows their voice mattered. They were believed. They, as a human being, matter, because all the charges were there. Now, plea deals happen, and the victim may say, I don't want to see him. I can't go. We don't want victims to leave court and go commit suicide, or commit suicide, or cut, or be bulimic, or any of the things that are use illegal drugs or alcohol, any of the things that happen as a result of this, because they can't handle it. So plea deals happen for many reasons, and I'm mindful of that. But let's, at the outside, tell them they matter. And maybe that will empower them to come forward, and more people to come forward, not to diminish their voice by saying, yeah, it might have happened 100 times, but we're just going to put 2 charges. That's all we do. It's not all you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very important. So thank you. I would definitely bring that up. And, well, Judge Aquilina, that's all the questions I have for you today. Again, I could talk to you for many hours, but maybe we'll circle back down the road and do another interview.
That'd be great.
Hopefully have Mom with us. And I appreciate you. This was really, really helpful and just so insightful. And I love that you're a cook too. And we drive past your place through Lansing all the time. I don't know your place, but we drive through Lansing quite often on our way to visit my in-laws. So maybe sometime my wife and I would, if you're open to it, would love to stop in and share some food together just for a short time.
Meet for coffee, or you can come in for some strawberry pie or something.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and it's been a total honor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'll look forward to the next time.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.